I have to say straight off the bat that I'm not really a fan of the Dizzy adventure games. I've played a few, but never really got into the puzzle and exploring nature of the games, and at the time was put off a bit by the Spectrum style graphics. However, I did like the character and story of Dizzy, and all of the egg-related puns that went along with him. Codemasters and the Oliver twins knew they could cook up an ongoing franchise with Dizzy. This much is obvious with the amount of games released on the many home computer systems. So they hatched a plan to go about capitalising on Dizzy's popularity by making games that appealed to gamers like me, who would rather play arcade-style games over the more sedate platform action of the main series. So let's crack on and take a look at the 5 Dizzy arcade games on the C64. Egged on by the success of Dizzy's adventure games, Fast Food was the first that wasn't a platformer. Clearly inspired by Pac-Man, the Oliver twins decided that the route to success was to reimagine classic arcade machines, a formula that would repeat in future titles. You control Dizzy as he makes his way around the Pac-Man style mazes as he tries to catch various, very brown and yellow pieces of food. There's a few power-ups and power-downs here, and enemies that are reminiscent of the Pac-Man ghosts. Obviously everything here has been deep-fried, and someone needs to tell Dizzy about the damage he's doing to his cholesterol levels. Certainly he moves very slowly, making the first few levels that like enemies laborious to get through. Would it have hurt to have made some of the items fruit or veg to at least add some colour? The mazes here are also very drab, only adding to the blandness of the visuals during gameplay. There's some nice artwork here on the presentation side of things, which is a shame when you consider how drab the main game looks. Another thing borrowed from Pac-Man are some humorous cutscenes between levels, which are about the only thing worth playing through this for. Not the best start, but you have to break a few... you get the picture. The second game also has a very Pac-Man feel to it, but spliced with the Sega classic Flicky. Like in Flicky, you collect helpless little creatures, this time what apparently looks like little cavemen, and then get them to an exit. You also get a weapon as assigned at the start of each level, partly by chance. These work in various ways, with a hammer and fireball being the easiest to use. As you make your way through the castle, you'll eventually get to a bonus level where you catch objects thrown from the battlements with a big fishing net. Avoid the bombs and catch the food for points, while missing one of Dizzy's yoke folk will end the bonus stage and leave them to be eaten by the shark in the moat. After the disappointment of the first game, this is surprisingly good. Mixing the mechanics of 2 classic arcade games just works here, and the difficulty curve is nicely paced. The bonus levels are a fun change from the main game, and are probably the best looking sections here, which raises my main issue with the game. Most of the series have some nice artwork, but the main levels here are just drab and lacking in real polish. This takes nothing away from the gameplay though, which is my favourite from the whole series. Something interesting to note is while these ports to all the different systems work in roughly the same way, this C64 version is a totally different game to Kwik Snax on all the other computers, so it's worth a go if you've only played the Specky or Amiga versions. Here we have Dizzy Panic, and we find Dizzy has got himself a job in a factory and has to move the row of slots on the bottom of the screen to fit the shape of the blocks falling from the top to meet toys, apparently. I had some reservations about the Spectrum style graphics and colours at first, and as I plodded through the first 2 levels at a snail's pace, I initially thought this was going to be a nice little puzzler, and reminds me a bit of Clacks. However, there seems to be a major problem with pacing come level 3, with the addition of another colour of block and a marked increase in difficulty, as any missed block brings the nozzle that feeds the blocks closer to the bottom of the screen. When it reaches the bottom, it's game over, which will happen to you regularly when you play this, especially with the unforgiving nature of the hit detection on the slots. Apparently, feeding 3 blocks or more at a time into the slots raises the nozzles back up, but you'll be hard pressed to do this often enough to finish levels beyond the first 2. This received some terrible reviews at the time, and while it doesn't play very well today, it feels to me like there's a decent game here underneath it all. It could just have done with a bit more incubation time in development. Bubble Dizzy next, and this game seems to be the only game here that isn't directly inspired by an arcade machine, and was originally featured in the Dizzy adventure game Fantastic Dizzy. Dizzy has been captured by pirates and is made to walk the plank into the open ocean. He falls down to the ocean floor and then has to jump or ride on the bubbles rising up to bring him back to the surface. It's a simple premise and works well, although there are issues with unreliable jumping from the bubbles and frustrating landing or falling on some surfaces. It takes a few goes to figure out how and when you can actually use the bubbles, as they don't work exactly as you might expect a solid platform to. The difficulty increases at a reasonable pace this time, with trickier sections and enemies to avoid gradually being introduced through the levels. It also looks the best of the games, and like all of the others has a nice cheery tune to keep you entertained. The main issue here is the repetitive nature of the game. There's no bonus stages or funny cutscenes to break up the levels, which all have exactly the same aim: get to the surface before your air runs out. This is still worth your time today, but remember it was released as a budget title like all of the games here, so go into it with realistic expectations of longevity. As the popularity of the home computer started to fade, and players and publishers moved on to console platforms, Codemasters released this final arcade game, which, like Bubble Dizzy, originally appeared in Fantastic. Dizzy Down the Rapids takes its inspiration from Atari's Tubin, and sees Dizzy and his girlfriend Daisy trying to escape from trolls and barrels in various waterways. Unlike Tubin, you have a limited amount of apples to use to get rid of enemies, and part of the challenge is knowing when to use these as they're in short supply. There's a lot of memorisation to get past the different sections here, which is hard enough on its own. However, there's also a timer counting down, so you're forced to speed through it. No slowly meandering and finding your way here if you want to get to the next level. Like the previous game, there's some nice pixel work here. There's a bonus stage after each level to break things up a bit, which helps with these short games with repetitive aims. The hit detection is passable, though it's not always clear how much the background objects will hinder your progress, and there's some cheap deaths from enemies that pop up as soon as you scroll down to them. These minor grievances aside, this is another game that you can have a go with and get some fun out of. If you picked this up on a budget tape back in the day, you'd probably be fairly happy, even if it wasn't something you'd be revisiting all that regularly. So there you have it, 5 arcade style games from Dizzy on the C64. Kwik Snax, even with its poor graphics, is the best here, and Bubble Dizzy and Dizzy Down the Rapids are 2 good eggs. Dizzy Panic and Fast Food are rotten and have failed the float test. It's best to leave them alone. If you fancy trying these games out, they're all free to play at the time of publishing this video on antstreamarcade. You could even go and try them out against the Speccy and Amiga versions there. Thanks for watching. If you like what you've seen, give this a thumbs up, and hit the subscribe button to see more next time. Did I say dizzy enough? I think I did.